Welcome back, everyone. This is Hurricane Central, and we are tracking Nate. Gulfport, Mississippi, one of many coastal cities that will have impacts as Nate continues to move inland. We've been seeing a water rise for days because of just the atmospheric setup with that wind going across the Gulf and pushing it towards land. Now that we have a tropical system on top of that, the impacts from that water rise, that surge, will only be made worse. We've been seeing at times already some waves crashing up over this roadway, significantly less people kind of out and about and watching the waves at the moment, and hopefully that is a good sign that people are trying to get back to where they're going to be to ride out this storm and wait for it to pass. Remember, a lot of these impacts happen overnight, which only compounds the problem. So this is the live look here in Gulfport, Mississippi, but there are many other areas that are still in play. I want to bring in our senior hurricane specialist, Brian Norcross, because we want to get the latest information with this storm. Brian, some big impacts, even though this was just, a disorganized tropical storm about, 36 hours ago or so.
And it's kind of a disorganized Hurricane coast. And there's the city of New Orleans, and there's Lake Pontchartrain up there. And look at the water in Lake Pontchartrain. It's already almost 2.5 feet above where it would normally, the dry part would normally be. Now, that's a little misleading because there is this big levee system that protects New Orleans there, and this is just outside the levee on the Orleans Parish, Jefferson Parish line where that reading is taken, but it just shows you the elevated water in the lake. And it's the west part of the lake that is of most concern at the moment because the water is all being pushed that way. And then you see even way over here, far to the west, still the water in the whole Gulf of Mexico is elevated. Now, look to the east of there. Look at Waveland, Mississippi. We're heading for 3 feet there. And remember that high tide comes after midnight tonight. So it's only coming up now on 5 o'clock in the central time zone. And so we're a good 7 hours from high tide. They have funny tides there. But in any case, we're going to just gradually go up as we go through the evening. So that's going to add about a foot when we get to high tide. So, and right now the wind is coming from the east. So what's happening is that the storm is pushing water this way, and it's kind of getting bottled up in this corner here between Louisiana and Mississippi, and that's forcing the water over the land there at Waveland and other locations along the coast here. And this is part of the Gulf Coast being extremely vulnerable to a storm surge. Pascagoula is a little over 2 feet, and you see even all the way over at Panama City Beach, it's over a foot higher than it would normally be at high tide. So the water is coming up, and the storm, the peak wind, is nowhere near the coastline. All right, to bring you up to date on where we are as of the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center, 4 o'clock Central, 5 o'clock Eastern Time advisory. The estimate at that time was 90 miles an hour in terms of the peak wind somewhere in the storm. Now, hurricane hunters are out there. I haven't seen any winds of that strength, but we do see, and we'll look closely on the satellite picture here in a second, some development near the center, which sometimes means that it's trying to strengthen and organize a little bit. So it's still over warm waters, and we'll just see. We'll just see. Bottom line is, hurricane is coming. We're going to prepare for a Category 2, and it's moving along north-northwest at 23, which is down a few miles per hour, but this is an extraordinarily fast forward movement in the Gulf of Mexico. National Hurricane Center says maybe the record, based on what we know, it's the record, but we don't have good records that go back too terribly far to know exactly how fast big storms were moving many, many years ago. Now, here's the radar right now. This is the Mobile radar, and it shows where the center is. Notice we have only half a hurricane. Kind of like when Irma came into Key West, although this is nowhere near as strong. That was only half a hurricane on the north side. So we'll see if we get some kind of strong development there. We do have pretty strong bands out in here, and then we have this very strong band that is moving in toward the Mobile area now and down toward Gulf Shores and moved up through the Mississippi coast earlier on. Here we see what the wind measurements are. Here you see Mobile gusting up to 40 miles an hour now. In a lot of places, it's not much. So this is the nature of kind of a half a hurricane thing. You can have very little on the west side and then pretty strong winds on the east side. And of course, these buoys and stations on the land don't necessarily get the exact band, so it's not really representative of the strongest winds. But here we can track, there's where the center is. You can kind of make out the movement. Looks like it's in that direction. Looks like this may be making landfall in just the next hour or two, right there in the tip of Mississippi, and then maybe another landfall here, and then another landfall up on the state of Mississippi if it continues on the track that it appears to be on right now. All right, there's where it was at yesterday morning. Now watch as we go through 5 o'clock this morning. Watch as we go through time. You see all the purples, and then see them go away. A lot of purple, that means very strong thunderstorms. That's where they were seeing the very strong winds, and now they kind of go away. So what is going on there? Let's look at the water vapor and notice that there's drier, generally drier. So yellow is the most moist, and then you get the greens, and then you get the whites, and then you get down into the dry air, which is the oranges. So notice that we have the yellows right by the center. That's why I say maybe it's trying to develop a center there, but generally we see some of this dry air here. It looks like maybe it's filtering in there. The other thing is, when the storm is moving fast like that, super fast, the only thing that can keep it going is if the flow around it in the atmosphere is also moving fast along with it. Otherwise, it tries to tear itself apart. So if the flow might have slowed down a little bit on this side, so we have less of a flow here and maybe a little more of a flow there, and the storm is moving somewhere in the middle, you don't have that pristine environment, and maybe some dry air kind of got filtered in here, pulled in, because we didn't have a good uniform flow. So we're speculating there, but certainly air has come in, but we're standing by for a hurricane at the Mississippi coast tonight. All right, let's. Okay, so we're wrapping up this hour, but our coverage continues here on the Weather Channel in just a few seconds.
And those few seconds are now. Our special coverage of Hurricane Nate continues as Nate is barreling towards the Gulf Coast. We're talking about winds of 90 miles per hour. Category 1 storm, still a potential for some strengthening, but landfall is looking increasingly imminent here as our storm continues to move north-northwest near 23 miles per hour. On the right side of your screen, Gulfport, Mississippi, New Orleans, Waveland, Mississippi, all areas that could have real impacts as this storm continues to make its way on off towards the north. We're talking a water rise, we're talking about a rainfall flood threat, we're talking about winds and power problems as all of those combine. Thanks for staying with us. This is Hurricane Central. We are tracking Nate. I'm meteorologist Mark Elliott, and I hope you're ready because this storm continues to go on that very fast forward pace. It means that we are going to continue to see those impacts on the increase through the overnight hours. As kind of each band comes in, the weather will continue to deteriorate. Let's show you some of the images that we already have coming into us here at the Weather Channel headquarters, including the impacts for the boats. This is going to be a big part of this story, right? Because as the water rise continues, boats that aren't well secured or aren't tied up exactly right or get moved off their moorings just a bit could wind up looking like this. This is unfortunate for this boat owner. Gulfport, Mississippi, boat is just slammed up against the rocks and starting to sink there as the waves continue to come on in. That is going to be a loss for that vessel, that's for sure. Meanwhile, we're going to get back with Chris Warren in just a little bit, but this is video that he actually took. This is time-lapse imagery. Basically, he arrived on the scene in Orange Beach to the alert of a tornado warning, took a look outside, and there it was right in front of him. This can happen, and we anticipate this to continue as we work our way through the rest of the next few hours here. You know, that is a water spout, but the potential for those to come on land. Meanwhile, again, we hope you're ready. This was earlier today in Biloxi, Mississippi. People are, putting up the shutters, getting everything prepared to kind of ride out this storm. I will say that the best news is that fast forward motion. It means you're kind of out of time for putting up plywood, stuff like that, because the winds are too strong. It was a good thing this was taken earlier today, but those winds won't be there too long. Because the storm is moving so quickly, the worst of the weather moves through every location pretty quickly as well. And again, another view from Dauphin Island, where people are putting up the plywood, respecting this storm, because Nate is still a hurricane and could potentially be a reasonably strong hurricane before all is said and done. A live look here at Gulfport, Mississippi, another area that's seeing that water rise and has been seeing the water rise at times. In fact, the water that you're seeing on the ground on the street there is largely not because of rain, it's because of waves crashing against that seawall and splashing up over the roadway. At times we've seen that very thing just by watching this video, waves crashing on over the road at times. Luckily, nothing too extreme with regards to flooding, but that's something that we will have to continue to monitor as well. Senior hurricane specialist Brian Norcross is here with me as well. And Brian, it's a Category 1 hurricane. It's amazing. We have the hurricane hunters in there right now. They're looking for those hurricane winds, maybe not finding it. And yet on the satellite imagery, another kind of burst of thunderstorms right near the center. So, conflicting information from this storm right now.
Yeah, it is, and but things change quickly. Yeah. Things can change very quickly. That the hurricane hunters go through it, and then they go back, and they find something different when they come back. But here's where we are right now: 90-mile-an-hour estimate of the peak winds in the circulation as of the last advisory from the National Hurricane Center. We're a couple hours away from the update that will include the latest information from the hurricane hunters. And moving to the north-northwest quickly, as Mark said, very quickly at 23 miles per hour, and it's going to be right at the tip of Louisiana there, making landfall, we think. Well, I shouldn't say it's going to. It may make landfall here in the next couple hours as the first of maybe 3 landfalls it's going to make here tonight. There's the close-up, and here's what Mark was talking about. You notice, first of all, the amount of purple in the overall circulation. Purple meaning highest clouds, meaning often strongest winds, not always, but often, going away. But then we see near the center, right in here, we see this burst of purple. And the question is, if in that burst of purple, the storm has time to really organize a part of an eye wall and really consolidate the energy in that place and have the strong winds there. In any case, we have a big circulation here. It's already driving water up near the coast. The question is whether we're going to have a strong circulation somewhere near the center or within, say, 20 to 30 miles of the center to really get that peak storm surge up on the coast. We need to be ready for that. But there is an open question in terms of what's exactly going to happen. Here are the winds that are measured. These winds here on these offshore locations are all on oil rigs out there. And so they tend to be elevated well above the surface. So the winds tend to be a little higher than they actually are at the ocean. But they give us an idea of the general winds out there. But onshore, not too bad, gusting up 41 at Mobile there as that band came on in up there. Now, looking at the radar where we look at the velocities, normally we look at these for tornadoes, but they also allow us to look at the eye structure. And here we have the winds going back toward the New Orleans radar. Here are the winds away from the New Orleans radar. And look what this tells us here. It tells us that, yes, we have an eye trying to form on this side, but we don't have the corresponding side over here, that we have dry air coming in on this side of the storm, which generally inhibits its development some, but we'll see what happens as this comes together. We can see it right there. There's the land right there. Is it going to go right over that land? It's going to be close here in the next couple of hours. So here's the general forecast now. This is the model forecast. This assumes that the storm has a decent circulation, but notice it doesn't have much on the left side, so it's somewhat representative. And watch as we go forward in time here through the evening. You see 11 o'clock tonight is when the winds peak out in the Biloxi Gulfport area, up to around hurricane force according to the model, and not quite yet in Mobile, but then as we go overnight, then they peak in Mobile because the storm takes kind of a turn to the right and then move on off to the northeast, so it's gone pretty quickly. By morning, the winds are coming down and may see some sunshine there in Mississippi and along the Gulf Coast tomorrow afternoon. All right, Chris Warren is along the Gulf Coast in Orange Beach, but you've found a higher location, looks like. Chris, take it away.
Yeah, Brian, and what we've seen since we've been here is that preparations are being made. We're seeing sandbags at the base of doors and areas where water might get in. Gas stations have really kind of boarded things up, not actually boards, but they've locked things up. It's like metal gates in some cases and wrapped up their the actual hoses themselves, the gas pumps, and even at the beach, preparations have been made, taking stuff that can fly or essentially float away because wind and surge is going to be an issue, has been up. And where we are in Orange Beach right now, all of this stuff right here, all these white boxes, are stuff that they would use for supplies out on the beach, and they had to bring those in, and that's a bit of a task. For some local perspective here at Orange Beach, we're going to talk to the mayor. Tony Kennon's kind enough to join us. We certainly appreciate it. And you've lived here your whole life.
Pretty much, yes, sir.
What's the message you want to get out to people?
Well, you take it serious, and the most frustrating thing is if you get injured or if you get killed in a hurricane, you've done something really foolish or stupid, because they don't sneak up on you. It's not a tornado, it's not an earthquake. If you live in a low-lying area, get out. If you're in a mobile home or an RV, get out. If you're in a storm surge area, get out. Take precautions. And it's really frustrating when people don't do that.
And have you seen that through your years here, growing up here? You've been mayor for 9 years, right? Have you seen that? Have you seen examples of that in the past?
Yeah, there's always those that are just refused to get out. And again, I'm not going anywhere today. This is going to end up being more aggravation than it is anything else. But when it's a serious hurricane, we do get out and we come back as soon as it's over. But there are people that just refuse to leave, and then that puts us in an untenable or an situation of having to deal with it, or worse yet, dealing with it if something happens tragically.
There's always some unpredictability with hurricanes and tropical systems, no matter how strong they are. What do you think are going to be the areas that you need to watch out for? You're like, I'm not 100% sure this area may do okay. What are you going to be thinking about tonight?
Well, tornadoes are just as much a threat and a concern with a hurricane as anything else. So a mobile home or an RV, obviously. Having been here all my life, this level of wind, we pretty much know where there will be flooding. Most of our homes and buildings are now fortified. They're 160 mile an hour rated, so I don't see a lot of property damage. We will see a lot of deflation and loss of beach, which is very expensive to replace. We have very low areas that's 4 to 6 foot in elevation. They will be flooded. A lot of those homes are on pylons, so the lower level will be flooded. But for the most part, I feel like this is going to end up being a lot of aggravation and preparation, but I don't fear it as something that's concerning as far as some type of tragic event.
But I mean, so what's the message to people then? I mean, this is something people need to prepare for, right?
Well,
I think I hear thunder too. Do you hear that? Yeah. So what is the message? I mean, that's real quick. We're gonna wrap this up here. I think there's some lightning real close too.
Well, the message: if you don't live here, leave. If you live here and you've been here, then common sense prevails. You know what the situation is. We know the difference between a Category 1 area. Get out. If you're in a fortified home, high and dry, you're probably okay.
All right, Tony Kennon, Mayor of Orange Beach, we certainly appreciate your time today, and we're going to be smart, check the radar here, and get away from a potential thunderstorm. Lightning, I just saw that. So, Mark, we're going to go back to you right now. I want to double check the radar and see what we have coming at us. That line has been lurking out there, and I think it is finally starting to roll in where we are here in Orange Beach, Alabama.
Absolutely, and the mayor nailed it, right? When you have lightning strikes, when you have tornado potential, these are impacts that often get kind of overlooked because the name hurricane is there. This is not just a single point on the map. This is a huge complex of weather rotating around that center, and the impacts will be different depending on where you are. Chris there, of course, right there on the beach, and we've got that line with the lightning just off the coast and coming towards Chris. So hopefully he gets inside, stays safe, and so we can continue to hear from him as we go through the rest of the day. Here's what we know right now. Unfortunate news here, Nate being blamed for at least 24 deaths already. That was largely across Central America, including Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and Honduras. Back towards the U.S., curfews are in place tonight. They often start at 7 p.m. local time for cities like New Orleans and Biloxi, Mississippi, and all of the Gulf Coast casinos are now closed as ordered by the Mississippi Gaming Commission. The bottom line there is they don't want people out and about. They don't want to give anyone an excuse to still be around after that curfew. There's no need for anyone to be kind of on the roads tonight. Get to somewhere safe and let's ride this one out together. Of course, here are the current stats from our storm. Hurricane Nate, 90 mile per hour top wind speed, moving north-northwest at 23. And what I'm going to focus in on here is that kind of forward motion. That north-northwest will eventually turn more north and then eventually northeast. There's a front approaching that's going to sweep this away, and I can't really say away, sweep it north and east, continuing through many states here. You can follow this swath here. Birmingham, 50 mile per hour winds by Sunday afternoon, not out of the question, as whatever's left from Nate at that point moves right through. And then a big turn towards, let's say the southern Ohio Valley, back towards the mid-Atlantic and even the Northeast. Certainly questionable just how tropical in nature the storm is still by the time it moves in this direction. But because of this fast forward speed, because it is going to be hauling through here, we're talking about at least some of that core remaining in place. And that means some of the worst of the tropical winds will remain in place, and some of that tropical moisture will still be there, even as that front is approaching to sweep this away. As for the earliest possible arrival of tropical storm force winds, when we're really hoping that everybody is in the place that they want to stay in for the rest of the storm, we're talking about, say, this evening across much of northern Mississippi, central Alabama, southern Georgia, overnight as you look towards southern Tennessee all the way into the Atlanta metro area, Sunday morning towards Asheville and the rest of eastern Tennessee. That's for the earliest possible arrival of those tropical storm force winds. But there will be real impacts here, right? We're talking about that potential because of the wind, because of all the rain that's there, the saturated grounds. Trees will have a harder time staying up when you get a burst of wind along with heavy rain at the same time. So if those trees happen to be problematic falls and land on power lines, we're talking about power issues. They are expected here, certainly near the coast, but because of that fast forward motion, we're also looking at a lot of power problems much further inland. Montgomery, Birmingham, the kind of northwest side of Atlanta, all the way through Asheville, we are talking likely power problems. And again, I mentioned that heavy rain component that comes along with it. That means a flash flood watch from Mobile to Birmingham to Dalton, Georgia, and just about everywhere in between. Okay, so that's the kind of the inland component, but we also want to talk more about the surge component. There is the potential for a significant storm surge. It's going to be kind of, it depends on where you are, because there are all these intricacies with regards to how the coast plays, how the kind of the shape of the ocean plays a role, and exactly where the storm goes. So let's bring back hurricane specialist, senior hurricane specialist Brian Norcross. You can see the storm surge warnings on the map for that potential for destructive storm surge. But let's talk more about this. How does this happen, and why does it matter so much about where you exactly are when a storm is coming in?
Because this coast is so complicated, and we have the flow now coming around the hurricane like that. By the way, look how dried out the left side of the hurricane is.
Unbelievable how lopsided it is.
But it's pushing the water into this kind of L-shaped coast there. And so where can the water go? It has to go over the land, and that's really the storm surge threat. And here is the most vulnerable part of the coast for a storm that's coming from this direction. So that's where we're going to look for the storm surge rise and the water rise at this point. And you see we have a couple things going on. Look all the way to the to the west. This is almost the other side of Louisiana. The whole water, as you were talking about, in the Gulf of Mexico, the northern Gulf, is higher than normal, right? But in this part of the coast here where the flow is coming in, this is where we're going to watch the water really go up. And we're seeing it especially on the Mississippi coast. Look at that. Waveland is almost 3 feet now, and we're still 6 hours or more from high tide.
You could argue places in here that we don't necessarily have a reading just because of where the winds are going, maybe even higher than that at this point.
It likely is higher than that. In fact, this area, this is very marshy area here, and that New Orleans east, this part in here is just all marsh, but that's very vulnerable, and that's why they evacuated over there outside of the levee protection system. So that was a significant thing. Now, the National Hurricane Center makes a map that looks like this just to show you here. Don't worry about what actually the numbers on these colors are, but to show you based on a storm on this kind of track and based on the possibility maybe it could be Category 2, in the orange areas, look at this, that would be over 9 feet. So there are dangerous spots along the coast here, and that's why they evacuate.
Yeah, and inland as well. The river system, the bays, the water rise affects everyone. Brian, thanks so much. Let's go back out to Chris Warren now, who is kind of suck out some higher ground there.
Yeah, a little bit higher ground, but more importantly, we're now under cover because of the lightning, semi-frequent lightning right now. Coming up here on the Weather Channel Hurricane Center, we're looking at the impacts, inland, city-specific timing. Coming up, Hurricane Nate. Tracking Nate, this is Hurricane Central. You are watching the Weather Channel. I'm meteorologist Chris Warren in Orange Beach, Alabama. And if you were watching this a little bit earlier, there were a lot of people on the beach. Not the case anymore. We're seeing the flags still whipping around. The surf is up. The rain and the wind has really picked up as well. In fact, we're undercover right now because the lightning for the past about 5 or 6 minutes, though, we haven't heard much of it, but it was frequent for a little while. We were seeing the lightning, we were hearing the thunder. That's what got our attention first, and then we saw some lightning, saw a little bit of it. But a reminder, while there is this hurricane that is moving on shore, there's going to be localized effects that could be extremely dangerous. Lightning is one of them. And then, Mark, we also know that tornadoes are a possibility. Just right out here a few hours ago, I saw a water spout develop, and it looked pretty hardy. If it would have made it on shore, that would have been bad news. Yeah, you know, that's one thing that has not been crossed off my kind of weather bucket list, is seeing a water spout like this one. This is, Chris, you basically just arrived on the scene, got the alert on your phone, right? Looked out, and that was right in front of you. That's exactly what happened. I showed up, and you kind of organize, you unpack, and I looked at my phone, and it was one of the emergency alerts. On my phone, I have that clicked. You can go in, I believe most phones are like this. You can go in and, you know, say, yes, I want to have the alerts, and I believe that you can get Amber Alerts and Civil Emergency, and which includes the weather alerts, too. You have that checked on. I saw it, and then I checked the radar, and I was like, oh. And then I went and looked out the window, and that's what I saw. At first, though, I mean, it took me a little while to, get the video and everything, but at first, the funnel didn't go all the way to the ground. At first, it looked like, Mark, we take away the water, it looked like a tornado was developing. I mean, full on, not like something you would expect in the summer in the Keys. Now, this is something you would expect any time of the year in the United States, in the plains or in the south. You look like you had a wall cloud initially. You can kind of see it here. But then the funnel started, and then eventually seeing the actual Gulf itself, the water spinning up. And yes, it was also on my bucket list. And unfortunately, this not necessarily the way I would have wanted to see it. I'm hoping to, being at a tiki bar in the Keys to see a water spout way off there. But this is a reminder that we're in a dangerous situation, Mark. And that was the first thing. That's the other thing, Mark. It was one of the first things I saw when I got here. And that kind of gave me a little bit of an eerie feeling as well, knowing that Hurricane Nate is still out there. A little jolt back to reality that we are covering a hurricane on our hands, and that those impacts, not only the tornado threat, but the inland flood threat, the power outage threat. This is not just a coastal story. This is going to continue well inland. Let's break down some of those inland impacts for you, because this fast forward motion, it means the core of the storm will be able to continue to roll forward and roll inland without losing too much of that, that center core. It means that the gusty winds, the tropical feel for this system, could still be moving through places like Birmingham, potentially as far northeast as Charleston, although we're really going to lose a lot of the tropical characteristics by the time we get that far north. But it doesn't mean we'll lose all the tropical moisture. Look at this, flood alerts as far north and east as, say, southern portions of North Carolina, certainly Alabama, North Georgia, down towards Mobile, very heavy rain. You combine the very heavy rain, this amount of rain, when we're talking about 5 to 8 inches, locally even a little bit more than that, with the kind of winds with a fast-moving tropical system, and power outages become more and more likely. Getting into some of the specifics for your area, we'll go into Birmingham, right? 5 to 8 inches of rain. That's why you've got that flash flood watch that's up. Tropical storm warning. You could have some gusty winds. Maybe not the strongest winds you've ever seen, but if you do get a quick burst of 5 to 8 inches of rain, that makes it that much more difficult for those roots to hold into the soil. Here's the view, and it looks basically everyone in and around Birmingham is right about that 3, 4, 5, 6 inches potential through Monday. That's both with the storm coming by and the front that's sweeping it away. Even Atlanta, it looks like the north and specifically northwest sides could be a little bit more dramatic, but you do have a tropical storm watch in place for Atlanta. 1 to 2 inches of rain. Worst of the wind will happen Sunday afternoon. We're talking about 30 mile-per-hour gusts, maybe a little bit more than that. Could be enough for some power outages. We'll be right back.
This is a very dangerous storm. It has already claimed the lives of at least 20 people in Nicaragua and in Honduras.
Life-threatening levels of storm surge flooding, 7 to 11 feet, Lake Pontchartrain, all across the Mississippi Gulf Coast.
As you are preparing, everyone should secure outdoor furniture, loose debris, garbage cans, and the like to make sure that they do not become projectiles.
This is now a 90-mile-per-hour hurricane, but it is forecast to strengthen to a Category 2 hurricane before it makes landfall.
Tracking Nate, this is Hurricane Central. Right now, we are looking at some of the rain bands that are moving onshore to the Gulf Coast states. Also looking live right now, we have a network of cameras set up along the Gulf Coast. I'm meteorologist Chris Warren along the Gulf Coast here in Orange Beach, Alabama, along with our team of meteorologists here from Louisiana to Florida. Also, areas inland as well, inland portions of Alabama and Georgia, Atlanta, Birmingham, heads up. We're going to take a look at what you can expect. But first, we're looking at impacts here right along the Gulf Coast. We're seeing the surf picking up, and at times this heavy rain is also rolling in. This is what we can expect with the storm. It is going to be an overnight event here for the beaches and for the immediate coast, and then it cooks. It moves in a hurry to the inland locations. Again, I'm here at Orange Beach in Alabama along the Gulf Coast, not too far away from the Florida border right now. And we had a chance to speak with people as we were driving around a little bit earlier today. And the common theme was one of, we're going to watch this, see what happens. But certainly people do know there is a hurricane out there.
The wind and the water surge is the main concern for me. I'm right on the bay, so we have about a 6 to 8 foot surge possibility, and so that's the main thing that I'm worried about.
You know, we've just had these 2 big hurricanes in the area, and they were pretty gruesome. Some of them, you know, some of the bad things that happened to people, and not that I thought that would happen to us, but why take a chance on it?
Well, I'm concerned for the people here. We seem to be well prepared, but I guess there'll be people out there that perhaps aren't so well prepared and really don't know what to expect. But no, I'm feeling confident that everything my friends have done we're well prepared for.
And right now, live here as we track Nate along the Gulf Coast in Orange Beach, Alabama, we can see those waves. Look at those waves really picking up here and hitting that breakwater. A little bit of an inlet right there. That's what we're seeing. And the surf has been pretty consistently high throughout the afternoon. In fact, right out here, we did see several surfers. They were out for quite a long time. They're out here for quite a long time. Most of the people that weren't surfers, I'd say just about to a person, were not going in the water. It was strictly the surfers. And now I think that the water's just frankly just too nasty right now, but also the line of showers that have been coming through did have some lightning. It's been a while, about a half an hour since we've had some lightning here, so we're back outside, but we're watching this Gulf, and that is going to be one of the big factors. We'll be watching this water moving up tonight. So again, I'm here in Orange Beach. Storm Tracker Jim Cantori is going to be right here reporting from this beach to take us through the overnight hours during the worst of it. At least that's what we're expecting, the worst of it here in Alabama, right along the Gulf Coast. But we're also concerned about areas in Louisiana. We have hurricane warnings and watches all up and down from Louisiana all the way to Florida. And with that, in Alabama, the storm surge could be in Mobile up to around 9 feet. And looking at potential for some heavy rain. And you think about this, when the surge is up and you have some heavy rain coming down, trying to flow in, you have a bit of an issue there, right? You're gonna have the extra water piling up with the rain coming down and the water going in. So that is something that's gonna be interesting to see play out. And something else, the fact that no 2 stretches of the beach are exactly the same. The elevation is not consistent all the way down from Florida to Louisiana, and some areas have a lot of beach, some not as much, some have more dunes, some not as much. So Brian, as we go back to the Weather Channel headquarters in Atlanta with Senior Hurricane Specialist Brian Norcross, Brian, I think that the main thing is you need, to look to the officials, the locals, the emergency managers, the mayor, city administrators, whoever it may be, and police, look to them for guidance on what to do. And as you know, like we have here. And they'll put up signs and they'll alert the local residents as well. But as we were looking at this live camera, Brian, what are your thoughts on storm surge? Like, what are you going to be curious to see? What are you going to be monitoring in the coming hours for the potential, some of the worst of it?
Well, storm surge has to do with a variety of things. It has to do with the angle that the winds attack the coast. It has to do with the strength of the winds. And the big question mark we have is how strong are the winds going to be at their peak? We don't know that. It also has to do with how the timing comes out for high tide. And Chris, it looks like this is going to come in with its peak right about high tide, right about midnight tonight Central Time. And it also has a lot to do, like you were talking about, of exactly the composition of the beach and the floor of the ocean or the Gulf nearby. All those things, all those variables come into play in storm surge. So all of them are fixed except for the exact angle of the wind, although that's pretty well understood. But the strength is the big question, because we think the hurricane has gone through a bit of a weakening phase in terms of the amount that the winds are spread out, that the strong winds are spread out. Not 100% sure about that. Hurricane hunters out there, though, and look at what they've done. They've gone through the storm, around and going back, and I have not seen any reports up in the 90-mile-an-hour range. So is that an indication that some dry air has filtered in and weakened it? That's a good question. Right now, officially, we're still dealing with a 90-mile-an-hour storm, and we're an hour and change away from a new advisory from the Hurricane Center, where they'll use these reports from the hurricane hunters and update us on their best estimate of the maximum winds in Hurricane Nate. But right now, it does not look as well developed as it did. It looks like some dry air has gotten in, and if there are 90-mile-an-hour winds, they're fairly isolated. And that may be a good thing for the storm surge, but we're not doing anything at all different than we were doing when we were thinking there's a 105-mile-an-hour storm or a Category 2 coming. It's just too little time. So we're not 100% sure that it's not even going to strengthen as it goes toward the coast. North-northwest at 23 is the movement. Incredibly fast for a Gulf storm. It could be the fastest on record. Officially, it's the fastest on record, but when you go back very far, the records are kind of fuzzy, so it's a little harder to say. The sun is going down, but we can see that burst right there? Right there. See that burst? That's the question. That's what the hurricane hunters are investigating, to see if they can find strong winds in that burst right near the center. But you see how close that burst is right there to the land. So this is the end of the Mississippi River that comes down through Plaquemines Parish right there. Highway 23 kind of ends down there at Venice by Boothville. The question is the center of that circulation going to go over that land or not? It might go over that land, and then make landfall up there and actually have 3 landfalls here tonight. But in any case, it's got plenty of warm water to go if it has the structure to take advantage of it, Chris. That's the big question on intensity. Is the structure there? Because dry air has filtered into the system and dried out part of it. And once that happens, sometimes it takes quite a while to moisten it back up, Chris.
And now, Brian, I want to go back to something you said just a moment ago about the overall system and how fast it's moving, that it potentially, even though records don't go back and it could be a little fuzzy, as you said, it could be on record the fastest moving tropical cyclone. And when you hear on record, that often, to me, it's a clue that, well, something that we haven't experienced before. So the rate of speed, would you discuss how that could help us, how that maybe could lessen the impacts, or perhaps how could a fast-moving storm make things worse?
Well, so let's clarify here. This is in the Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane Hazel in 1954 that went up the East Coast, went into North Carolina. That was going at 26 miles per hour. We'll see in the final analysis what they actually put the average speed on this over a period of 12 hours, for example, and then we can really compare apples to apples. Also, storms that are out in the Atlantic moving from east to west not often go this fast, but regularly go this fast. So what's really unusual is to get the weather pattern set up so you get this effect of moving up into the Gulf Coast so quickly. Now, the good thing about that is that whatever is happening here and whatever winds we get, they're going to come and go much more quickly than Hurricane Irma, for example, tortured South Florida because it just blew and blew and blew and blew for a long time. This is going to come in tonight. By tomorrow morning, it's going to be much, much better in Mississippi. It'll take a little longer to get past Alabama because it's kind of curving around a little bit. But still, it's going to come and then it's going to be gone. So that's a really good thing about it moving fast. Another thing is when storms are moving fast, they don't have as much time to build up storm surge in general. But this storm was part of a big low pressure system that's been piling water against the coast here for days and elevated the tide a little bit already. Not tremendously, but a little bit. So when they move fast, generally you say, okay, that's good for storm surge, although maybe not in this case. And it's very good for rainfall because the main rain in this system is going to be in these very enhanced bands here, and you see they're kind of scattered around. Well, they're going to come and go, so that's going to limit the amount of rain that we're going to get in the system. Here we can see on the radar what I was talking about, the dry air. Look at this. We have half a hurricane. This part out here is dry, and over here it looks like a hurricane. If you were just to look at the right side of it there, you'd say, wow, that's pretty well developed, but we know there is a left side that doesn't really have any strong thunderstorm cells associated with it. So the question is, where is the center of circulation? Looks like the center is probably right in there. So we take the center point, and if we're moving like that, well, the question is it going to move over land just in terms of a technical landfall? But in any case, the bad weather is off to the east, so it is going to stay east. It looks like mostly at Plaquemines Parish, but it is piling water, storm surge water, Gulf water, up against Plaquemines Parish that sticks down there in Louisiana. Now we have this strong band that was affecting Chris over there near Gulf Shores, Alabama, up toward Mobile. And then you see there are gaps in here where the winds are pretty light, not much going on. And then this is the strong, this is where it's really going to pick up here later on this evening. That's moving toward the Gulf Coast. And then the strongest winds are probably very close to the center, and that'll come in late in the evening. So here's the thinking on the latest advisory. And that is that by after midnight tonight, say 1 a.m. Central Time, the center is somewhere ashore and the winds are coming down. Now, question is, does it have a chance over this warm water to increase in intensity? Probably not, with the structure half dried out and these dry gaps in there. It's unlikely, but it's not impossible since we're seeing that flare up there right near the center. So that's still a little bit of a question on how strong it is when it gets there, but then pretty quickly it dies on out and then moves on up to the north. And then the big question is the possibility of tornadoes or the possibility of flooding rains, because it's going to slow down a bit as it gets up here into the Appalachian Mountains, and ex-hurricanes in Appalachian Mountains are a problem. Talked about the possibility of tornadoes when the circulation is over Alabama. The upper level winds are still going to be blowing strong. So what happens is at the surface, the winds slow down because of friction, but the winds aloft keep going. So that means if you get a thunderstorm that goes up, it can start spinning pretty good in a situation like this. So we're concerned about the possibility of tornadoes to the right of the track, and that would be tomorrow, especially Alabama, maybe North Georgia, maybe into Tennessee. All right, back to Mark Elliott. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. We have some, there's some real impacts for the inland areas, but we want to talk about not only the coastal impacts, but also what has happened already. So let's go through what we know right now. The storm has already killed 24 people, unfortunately, largely over Central America, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and Honduras. Meanwhile, Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards has mobilized 1,300 National Guard troops, and a state of emergency has been declared for parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. Public transportation, as well as Uber and Lyft services in New Orleans, are being suspended at 7 o'clock. That goes in line with the curfew that's in place. That starts at 7 o'clock, goes until 7 in the morning. So Brian was talking to us about some of those inland impacts, including a tornado threat far away from the coast, right? Northern Alabama, northern Georgia, portions of the Carolinas, a tornado threat. But the coastal impacts are an important part of this story too, of course. So let's go through some of those so you know what to expect in, say, Pensacola, where tonight we're talking about 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts that move through, a quick burst of rain, 3 to 5 inches of rain as that kind of more steady slog of moisture moves in, and then a storm surge threat too. Often the most destructive and deadly component of any tropical system is the storm surge. You're talking 6 feet above normally dry ground. That's, I'm a little vertically challenged, but that would be over my head. I know it's over many of yours listening at home as well. As for the rainfall component, let's look at, say, around Mobile. Here's Pensacola, right? 4 to 5 inches of rain. And around Mobile, 6 inches of rain or so, not out of the question. Storm surge there. Once the storm moves by, once Nate moves this way, the winds are going to be coming almost due south to north, which will pile up the water in Mobile Bay. And all the rivers that are trying to get rid of these 6 to 7 inches of rain won't be able to let that water out. Everything gets blocked up. You wind up with flooding, both freshwater flooding from the rain and storm surge flooding kind of working together. You notice potential kind of worst case scenario storm surge flooding in Mobile of up to 9 feet. Now, a lot of that would be in areas that not a lot of people live, but it's still something that we have to keep in mind, because up to 9 feet is nothing to mess around with. If you're being told to leave an area, make sure you do. New Orleans, a little bit of a different case. We're talking about less than an inch of rain, especially at the airport, which is just west of the city. Just east of the city, you could have significantly more rain than that. Want to go back out to Chris Warren now, Orange Beach. Chris, those impacts continue to roll on in for you.
Yeah, we're getting some heavy rain right now, and Mark, that's been the forecast, is showers and thunderstorms, and then as the hurricane gets closer, we're going to be dealing with full-on squalls. And right now we're just getting some of the heaviest rain that we've seen since we had those tornado warnings, or that tornado warning with 2 cells a few hours ago. This is coming down pretty heavy, and that's some lightning. We want to get right now, do this pretty quickly if we can, go to the Director of Emergency Management in Alabama. Brian Hastings is going to join us right now on the phone. And Brian, I'm going to talk to you, but I'm going to get undercover here for a second. So, are you there, Brian?
Yes, I am. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, we appreciate it. We understand it's likely very busy for you right now. Can you give us an idea of what the big message is? What are you really trying to get out to everybody?
Well, for the last 3 days, we wanted to make sure that we message that this is a serious storm. I don't like to work in numbers with Category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a hurricane. There's going to be a significant surge threat for our coastal area, and then there's going to be a large swath of winds, thunderstorms, tornadoes, and rain that will result in widespread power outages for, in some cases, significant periods of time. And we just need to make sure that our Alabamians were preparing for that.
So, Brian, what is it like through the course of tonight? I know you likely have all your teams, you have your plan in place. What are you going to be interested to seeing? Like, what's your biggest concern, or what do you think is the biggest wild card that you're going to watch play out?
Well, the biggest wild card is that this storm has a personality. It's changing every moment, and every part of Alabama is going to have a different localized impact that we as state partners are going to have to shift and prioritize of what we need to do. So initially, when we start getting requests for needs or resources, we need to make sure that we establish C2, so we have command and control of how we're going to respond. Make sure we prioritize saving lives, instant stabilization, mitigating suffering, and then using those precious resources to help our local partners to clear debris, get emergency responders to where we need to be, and if anything exceeds the capability of our local communities, the state and National Guard are there to assist.
All right, so you're ready, and you know you can't go to every single door. You can't go and shake everybody's hand and explain exactly what every person's specific threat is. But what do you wish everyone knew, or what's the one? Well, I guess say it this way: what's the biggest mistake people make in a situation like this?
I think there's a couple. If you fail to plan, then you've planned to fail. And sometimes when you're on the Gulf Shore and you've gone to vacation and the weather is so nice, it was so nice this morning, it's hard to believe that, no kidding, the fastest storm of this season in recent history is about to hit Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And when you hear people talk about, hey, a storm is coming, please voluntarily leave the coast, most people kind of go back to the storm they knew 10, 20 years ago and go, oh, I've been through this before, it's not a big deal. 9 feet of surge is a big deal. Water kills. Wind is going to take us off the grid, and we need people to minimize their exposure to the threats.
And Brian, what's the message to inland areas? This storm rolls through the morning and beyond.
Well, the message to inland areas is that, a lot of times we focus on the coast because it's the best shots and it's where the initial impact of the storm is, but this is an Alabama storm, and we are going to have impacts from the far southeast or southwest corner all the way to the north east corner, and there's going to be significant winds, there's going to be power lines down, and there's going to be widespread power outages that we've been working with Alabama Power, Alabama South, and our rural co-ops to make sure that we have capacity to get people back on the grid. So people cannot let their guard down. This is an Alabama storm, and everyone in Alabama needs to be prepared.
All right, Brian Hastings, the Director of Emergency Management for Alabama, thank you so much for your time, and we wish you all the citizens from the Gulf Coast are safe.
We are tracking Nate and tracking all the coastal impacts that come along with a hurricane that is barreling towards the U.S. shores. Here in Gulfport, Mississippi, we've been watching the waves, right? The waves have been crashing against the seawall and then splashing up against the road. You can see some of that off in the distance there. For another look, how about this? Look at the wild water here. This is Coden, Alabama, just west of Mobile Bay. And man, look at how the wind is sweeping that water towards the roadway. You can see the car approaching the camera at this point. At times the wave and the spray from those waves masking the headlights. So I'm sure there's at least some spray going over the roadway, making for difficult travel, and hopefully we don't get actual wave action going over the roadway. But unfortunately there is a significant storm surge threat as Hurricane Nate continues to move ever closer towards shore. It's moving extraordinarily fast, much faster than we typically see storms move in the Gulf of Mexico. And so impacts like this are going to continue to be on the increase. Here are some of the current stats with Hurricane Nate as of the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. We're talking about 90-mile-per-hour winds, Category 1 storm, moving north-northwest at 23 miles per hour. Eventually, and probably sooner rather than later, we're going to see that movement turn due north and then eventually north-northeast as it gets caught up by an approaching cold front. It's this front that's going to be helping to sweep the storm further inland and further away. Official track here from the National Hurricane Center still calling for a hurricane at landfall and then holding that core together through, let's say, much of Mississippi into Alabama before losing those tropical characteristics. Want to bring in senior hurricane specialist Brian Norcross now, watching all the kind of intricacies of this storm, including what's still a pretty decent flare-up of new storms near that center just off the shore. What does that tell you about what the storm's trying to do right now?
Yeah, so we've got conflicting information. We have this flare up near the center mark, like you say, and we have significant drying wrapping around that, which indicates we don't have strong winds in some places that we did farther out from the center. So I'll show you all that in just a second. But we are having the effect on the water with the hurricane. It's already 2.5 feet above where it would normally be dry in Lake Pontchartrain there, outside of the levee system. So that's not a threat to anybody. But the west side of the lake, where we don't have a measurement, there is some potential for a problem because of the wind just blowing the lake water over to the west. Otherwise, you see a lot of areas up around 2 feet. Now, over in Mississippi, where 2.7 feet at Waveland here, 2.3 feet at Pascagoula. Again, this is over normally dry land. So this is just the beginning because the storm, first of all, is way down here to the south. It's got a ways to go before we get the strongest winds pushing on the water. And the other thing is that the wind direction is going to change. So right now, it's right along the coast. It's going to change to be more onshore later on all along the coast here, including up into Mobile Bay and up into the Mississippi coast. So there's a long way to go in terms of the evening here. We have hours to go as the water should continue to rise. Here's the latest update from the Hurricane Center. Still, the estimate is 90 miles per hour. We'll get an update in about an hour as they analyze the hurricane hunters that are out there. And I'm not seeing 90-mile-an-hour winds from the hurricane hunters that are there right now. But we'll see how the Hurricane Center analyzes all of the data coming in. North-northwest, that very fast movement to the north-northwest at 3 miles per hour. All right, let's look at these. First of all, the radar, and then we'll look at the satellite really close up. The radar is showing us we have half a hurricane. Look at it, it's just right there, right down the center. So there is the center of I don't want to call it the eye. It would be the eye if this were complete. It's trying to form an eye wall in that arc right there. And so if you completed that, it would be kind of a donut like that. So that's the center of circulation. So where the center of that donut comes ashore, if it comes over the land, that's called a landfall, and that's moving generally in this direction. Will it actually make landfall there in southeastern Louisiana? It's going to be close. Also in extreme eastern Louisiana there, just south of Lake Borgne, that's going to be close. And then it will make landfall up on the Mississippi coast later on tonight. But you can see that that's not solid. Then we have a band here, and each one of these bands, as you go closer to the center, will have stronger winds. But none of these look very solid at this point, and not as good as they would have looked the way the storm looked yesterday, I don't believe. Here are the winds that we're measuring out there, and none of them are terribly high. I have a buoy out here measuring sustained winds at 43. That's a little bit interesting, and we get some gusts. We've had gusts over 40 in Mobile here with that line that went through, but nothing really too much yet. We're waiting on this weather here to come ashore. So when that weather there comes up over the coastline later on tonight, that's when the most significant weather is going to be ashore. We also have a pretty strong band, notice, well inland already, so definitely very gusty winds with that as well. All right, now here's the satellite as it was 6:30 this morning, and here's where you can see what's happened during the day today and how different it is. Look at these big batches of purple, and what we're going to see is we're going to get a solid mass of purple, and then it's going to kind of go away. Watch as we go through the day today. See it get real solid there, kind of solid and circular, and then kind of go away, and then a little purple patch pops up right in the center. So what's happened here, I think, is a lot of dry air over in here has filtered into the system and wrapped up in there, and it's trying to work its hurricane mechanics to develop an eye wall, and that's what we're seeing in that patch right in the center. But with all that dry air in there, I just don't think it's going to have the ability to moisten enough to have to get the wind speeds up at all, if they still are up. Here we can actually look at the water vapor in the atmosphere and see where the dry air is. The oranges are dry air. This is a cold front that's pushing in over here, and that's all dry air out there to the west. And some of that has filtered in here and kind of wrapped around. See where the whites are in there? That's where it's drying out, and you know, you have at the surface, you have moist air coming into the system, and then it's trying there to moisten up the center, but I just don't think it's going to be able to do that with so much dry air in there. And the reason that's really important is because the winds aloft, well above the surface of the Gulf, are spinning really fast. So if you get tall thunderstorms that go up into those fast spinning winds and it rains hard, say in there, then it'll bring those down to the surface, and that's how you get the strong winds down at the surface of the earth. But it's only where we have these taller cloud tops that we're going to get that. If we don't have the tall clouds, we don't get the strong winds at the surface. So here's the forecast going through the evening. You see up around midnight is when we expect to have the winds peaking there on the Mississippi coast, a little later than that in Mobile. All right, that's it for this hour. Our coverage continues live here on the Weather Channel in just a few seconds.
This is Hurricane Central, and we are tracking Hurricane Nate, moving ever closer to the northern Gulf Coast states. Impacts for Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle. Coastal impacts, and then the inland impacts go significantly further inland from there, potentially all the way into the Mid-Atlantic, the Ohio Valley. You all need to be watching what happens with this storm over the next several hours to see just how strong it will be, because that will determine just how many winds and those wind gusts that will come through your neck of the woods. This is special coverage of Hurricane Nate continuing right now. I'm meteorologist Mark Elliott following this storm for you, along with senior hurricane specialist Brian Norcross, as well as Chris Warren, who is in Orange Beach for us tonight. We continue to follow this storm. Hurricane watches and warnings are up, tropical storm warnings as well, well inland. Let's take a look here. These are the current stats. 90-mile-per-hour storm moving north-northwest at 23, and that fast forward motion means that landfall could be mere hours away as this storm continues to move through. As for those coastal impacts, as the storm is approaching, my goodness, it looks like a hurricane out there, right? This is Coden, Alabama. This, if you're not familiar, is just west of Mobile Bay, and that is one angry Gulf of Mexico right there. The winds are kind of coming tangentially across these waves, shearing across the tops of those waves as they are breaking near this road, and you got this spray that's just flying across. So real impacts here, and a water rise that's in some areas that could be as high as 9 feet. Let's take a look at some of the images that have already started to come in from this storm. This is Gulfport, Mississippi. Unfortunately, a loss to this boat. There's going to have to be a recovery here. You know, this is going to be a boat story, right? We have so many interests, so many fishermen, so many houseboats, people's entire lives and livelihoods because of the Gulf here. And unfortunately, when you have a storm like this, you know there is going to be a lot of boats affected.